Hi folks, this is Dr. P to discuss at some length something that has surprised me, and that is that the willingness to negotiate in games is a frame of mind that most gamers nowadays have not learned or even actively dislike. I'm not a big negotiator in life, I suppose. I don't haggle on prices, for example, except on big ticket items like houses and cars, where it makes a big difference. But it seems natural to me to negotiate in games. When you play a game for more than two people, and there's considerable interaction between those people, which is the ideal in games to me, then you're outnumbered. If there are 5 players, you're outnumbered 5-1. And so you're negotiating to try to reduce that deficit. Of course, my favorite game from 1969 to 74 was Diplomacy, the quintessential negotiation game. It's also surprisingly a very highly cooperative game, but that's for another time. So the purpose of game negotiation is to compensate for being outnumbered. Unfortunately, some people regard negotiation as somehow bad or impure. Some call it politics. And of course, we don't have much respect for politics these days. Or some say, oh, it's just a popularity contest. They don't understand that it's about persuasion and mutual self-interest, not popularity. And I suspect that the people who say it's just a popularity contest are, for some reason, not people who succeed in popularity contests. It's not just horse trading or haggling either, where you go up and down in price. That's a small part of it, kind of inferior part of it. Some people even think it's unsporting, or that it's a metagame, that is something that's outside normal play, even outside the rules, and therefore bad. Well, of course, negotiation is built into games, certainly in Diplomacy, and sometimes in other games, business games and so on. Horse trading give and take, which is not negotiation per se, is alive in games like Munchkin, when players negotiate, or at least horse trade, who gets what loot. But this tends to be a split it down the middle thing, unless one party has a strong advantage. Negotiation itself is more sophisticated, involving quid pro quos and mutual self-interest. You give me something, I give you something. And ideally, if both parties imagine a variety of ways to help each other, you can end up with a win-win situation where both parties are better off. If you think of negotiation as a situation where you win and the other person loses, you're not likely to do so well in the long run. So we can simplify this and call it, can you gain an advantage through talking when you play the game, talking to the other players? In some games you can gain an advantage, in others you can't. There's no connection between what you might say and what happens in the game. If the game is a parallel competition, also called multiplayer solitaire, where there's nothing the players can do to help each other or hinder each other, there's no point in talking about it because there's no connection. Now, negotiation games are games about people, one of the 3 major categories of games. There are games of the psychological, games played with or against other people. Non-negotiation games are much more often games are all math. Games with and against the game system, not people. Those are the big dividing lines involved. And of course, negotiation games almost always are for more than 2 players. Because if there are only 2 players, you're not likely to have much to negotiate about unless it's a cooperative game. Now, this really struck me when I recently, with a colleague, designed a stock market game called Manipulation. The players are super rich oligarchs manipulating the world stock market. In testing, the players who were generally of Euro-style game players are not accustomed to negotiation because there's typically no opportunity to do so in a Euro game because there's so little interaction between the players. The players can't directly help or hinder each other, so why negotiate? Well, in this game, there are lots of opportunities for price collusion because you're trying to manipulate the prices. But I think too many people think that's somehow unfair, whereas in reality it's what the oligarchs would do. And of course, negotiation takes effort, sometimes a lot of effort. And people frequently do not put much effort into games. They're just sort of going along, killing time, passing time with other people. They don't want to make the effort to negotiate. So, if you're going to design negotiation into games, what do you have to think about? Well, you really need to know your audience. You need to know whether they're going to be willing to negotiate. You need to keep in mind that generally, self-esteem is at a low level these days. And to negotiate confidently requires higher levels of self-esteem. It's much more likely in highly competitive multiplayer more than two situations, which also require more self-esteem. Euros are not like that. Euros, you're doing your own thing. You're not losing things, you're always gaining things. Euros do not require high self-esteem to play. Now, in games with lots of direct interaction for more than two players, such as war games, negotiation is inevitable, even if you try to outlaw it. Any look, any gesture, any statement can be made to persuade, if not to make a deal. If you don't want deal making in war games, don't play games for more than two players. Now, as hobby gaming has broadened and people who are essentially casual gamers or even party gamers have joined, I think negotiation has become less common because those folks are less likely to put in the effort, or they're going to think there's something incorrect or wrong about negotiation. Thanks for listening.